Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am honored to welcome Pamela Mills, the Associate Director of Care Management for Corewood Care. Welcome, Pamela.
Lance, thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to be on your podcast.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. And is it okay if I call you Pam?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Pam, let's start off with tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a certified aging life care specialist, as well as an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care trainer. Those have been the primary areas of my work within the past 30 plus years that I've been working in this field primarily with people living with cognitive impairments, or what I like to refer to as cognitive change.
Okay. So what led you into this field? What got you interested in it and passionate about, what you're doing now?
So interestingly enough, I consider myself one of those lucky people who just kind of found her right fit at a very early age. My grandfather was living with my family when I was young, soon after my grandmother passed away when I was 8 years old. And we really just clicked. We hit it off. Now, I have to say that was probably because I did not have a lot of friends growing up. I was, one of those, ADHD type of children that was always running around and had challenging social skills. So I connected much more with my grandfather's generation. They always seemed to kind of like the cute little kid with the curly hair that would come and, talk nonstop and brighten their day, and always had something to say and had something to perform. So when I was 9 years old, I pretty much had more friends who were in their 90s than who were in, they're my age in their nines. And I just felt very comfortable around him and around his friends and his generation. And so that comfort zone just kind of grew into a natural trust. Mm-hmm. And when I was 13 years old, I signed up to be a candy striper. For those of you who remember those days in hospitals, and I still actually have the uniform. I don't fit in it, but I still have it. And I worked in hospitals. Now, of course, back then, a candy striper could do a lot more than they can these days. And they had me working directly with people living with memory impairment in the hospital. I was assisting people with eating. I was even changing bedpans, as a candy striper. And soon after, I found myself just kind of in that niche. I next moved on to working as an activity assistant in the local care community, what used to be called the nursing home. And I just thrived in the activities field and loved what I was doing in connecting with people living with memory impairments or cognitive change. Now, interestingly enough, I actually always said I was going to be a nurse. And I felt like that was like, oh, that's kind of the only career that I can have is as a nurse. And it just felt right to me. Even since I think like 3 or 4 years old, I said I was going to be a nurse. But then when I actually went to nursing school, I looked so much more forward to my weekends of working in the care community with people living with memory impairment and doing that recreation therapy role, that I left nursing school and in the final semester, which made my parents, hold their breath. And I said, I'm going to become a recreation therapist. And they're like, what in the world is that? Mm-hmm. And so that's where I eventually landed. And I came to Maryland, sight unseen, the state of Maryland. I grew up in New Jersey. and took a train to the University of Maryland. And next thing I know, I just found myself loving what I was doing, learning about therapeutic recreation and tuning in to people living with memory impairment. Now, there, as a recreation therapist, as a CTRS or certified therapeutic recreation specialist, there are many fields that you can focus on. So I found myself focusing not only on gerontology and the practice of working with people with cognitive decline or cognitive impairments, but I also found myself drawn to psychology. And so I worked actually in both fields for quite a while, for many years. And then I eventually got my degree in psychology. And I also got a master's degree in the management of aging services. And it was from there that I really just sought out to pretty much marry those two fields through humanistic approaches in psychology, similar to Rogerian psychology or the positive psychology work that we hear more frequently about affirming an individual and focusing only on the positive aspects of life and how that helps us build and feel comfortable and release from long-standing trauma. So I've really focused on marrying those two fields and using those humanistic approaches in memory care environments or working directly with people living with cognitive change in their homes.
Wonderful. What were some of the challenges you faced when you were first starting out? Now,
So
when I say first starting out, are you, I don't know, would you want to speak to like when you were doing the candy striping or when you entered in as a true professional in the field? Either one is fine.
Okay, and thanks for that question, for that clarification, because the field has constantly changed, which I am so happy to see. I consider myself a living history
Mhm.
of how we have changed in person-centered care over the years, which is really wonderful because I remember back in the mid 1980s when I was 13 or 15 years old, seeing people literally restrained, physically restrained because of their cognitive impairment. And part of me knew that that was wrong. I would sometimes say something to, in fact, I had a really crucial conversation with the director of nursing. I remember when I was 15 years old, who was the wife of my guidance counselor in middle school. And it's so awkward. And she just looked at me. She's like, "You think you know everything, don't you?" And I was just like, "Well, I just feel like I think this is wrong. We're tying people to furniture. How could this be right?" And I was pretty much kind of just poo-pooed at that time in my career, early career. But I just instinctually always felt that so much more could be done
Mm.
for people living with cognitive change, and restraining them was not appropriate. And I wanted to be the difference maker. I wanted to be the person to say, we can do better.
Yeah.
Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. And that was pretty much my dedication to why I wanted to do, find your why I wanted to do what I was choosing to do professionally.
Mhm.
I wanted to be a difference maker, not a Don Quixote who was constantly battling windmills,
Right.
but somebody who was truly a difference maker and can help other people be a difference maker as well.
Okay. No, that's great. Now you mentioned something there too, and it's so true where, the industry, just healthcare in general, overall has changed dramatically and it continues to change. But what have you seen change over the scope of your career?
I have witnessed so much in the advancement of person-centered care, which truly makes my heart sing.
Mhm.
This did not really exist in the 1980s. It was a medical model. It was an institutional model where staffing and people were seen as kind of more like widgets than people. There wasn't enough time to get to know each person. Hearing about their history and what brought them throughout their entire life to that moment was no one asked, no one wanted to know, no one felt they had time to learn. And so just seeing that change within itself is primary and necessary and continues to be necessary.
Well, and I would want to dig a little deeper on that too, Pam. I would say, we talk to dozens and dozens of families a week, hundreds in a month. A lot of people would say it's still like that, though. So,
I have to say it has to do with the access to care. And that is also something that I'm going to point towards the future,
yeah,
because the economy of care that we currently have in care communities, as well as the access to resources, is definitely needing an adjustment. A system change is truly needed, and hopefully, as more people choose to be difference makers in this field, the economy of care will be seen as a stepping stone. As we can move forward, we can staff better, we can train people better, we can access more people per resident to assist them. We can grow as humans treating humans.
absolutely. How someone listening, whether it's a healthcare professional, a family caregiver, or just somebody interested in healthcare in general, how how do you recommend that we can become a more person-centered, society in healthcare, or just in our approaches with maybe our mom, our spouse, or whoever it is we're caring for, or for patients if you're in the healthcare industry?
I feel that starting early is really the key. Whether your loved one is experiencing cognitive impairment or not, taking time to get to know who that person is. A lot of times we find ourselves, just having transactional relationships with our loved ones, but do we truly, truly know them? Do we know their history? And I can even talk about my own relationship with my father, who passed away earlier this year in January. And there was so much that I first learned about him after my mom passed away, and I became his distance caregiver. He was a Holocaust survivor. He never talked about that. He didn't talk about the trauma of running away from the Nazis at 10 years old and going from country to country until he finally came to America. He didn't talk about that. And I didn't know about that journey until my uncle published a story about it in his local paper.
Wow.
And I turned to my father and I'm like, Dad, Paul wrote this. Is this true? And he's like, yeah, it was true. I was a kid. I don't talk about that. I'm like, but this is profound. This is profound what you've lived through.
You didn't know your dad
And
was a part of, you didn't know your dad was involved in any of that during World War II?
not until we had that conversation when
Your
he was
mom,
already in his
your mom
late
knows?
80s. No one talked about it.
Wow. That's
No one.
remarkable. I mean, I can, I guess, understand not talking about it, but not even knowing he was involved in any way that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he didn't have a very good relationship with his father growing up, also. And there's, of course, a whole story there, as we all have stories about the dynamics within our family. But, people don't talk about their trauma. And actually, I'm very open about how trauma informed care is an essential component to quality care. So, knowing this generation and how it literally is referred to as often the silent generation, at least people who are in their 90s and above right now, talking about childhood trauma it wasn't done. And I've seen this more and more among families, where they're first learning about all the things that mom or dad went through much later in life, because it was a generation that was told to be resilient. It was told they were told to suck it up
Yeah.
and move on and get their lives together, and that's that. And I'm generation X, all so a lot of those messages were kind of passed down to us. And it wasn't until now, more recent generations, where people feel comfortable talking about
Yeah.
trauma, talking about how these experiences, especially in our youth, definitely frame our perspective and our point of view in life. And now also, going back to a person living with cognitive change, we all know that it's the short-term memory that often disappears first. And so a person is left with those longer-term memories. And if there's trauma there, it's those memories that are coming forward. And as carers, we don't know about that. And
Right.
the next thing we know, we're saying, oh, a person is resistant to care. Do we know why they are resistant to care? Well, have you ever been in a bathroom with somebody that you don't know who's now asking to take your clothes off? Yeah, that could be an issue because that's not normal, and I feel vulnerable and I feel scared. And if, for example, I had trauma in my past, I, I'm going to fight you
Right.
tooth and nail because of what you're doing to me. So learning about people, starting early, starting to be prepared both environmentally, physically, emotionally for that journey of care providing is an essential component of being able to do that care providing when the time comes.
Right. Absolutely. Let's talk about some of the biggest challenges in the industry right now. You kind of alluded to some of it with assisting people with cognitive impairment.
So I think so much of what we do when it comes to assisting people with cognitive impairment is we try to find a broad brush approach,
Yeah.
which doesn't work. It doesn't work. We're all individuals. And, I've worked with care providers, family care providers, spousal care providers over the years, and I've heard them talk about how you hear the saying, oh, you've met one person living with cognitive change, you've met one person. And some people are like, I don't really like that because it makes me feel very insecure. It makes me feel like I have nothing to rely on. I have nothing to guide me because, if you can't use the tools that you're trying to share with me, how do I know what to do? So how do I find my tools?
Yeah.
How do I find the right thing to do for my loved one? And unfortunately, the answer is often in the moment.
Right.
So one of the things that I teach and coach people about is learning how to live more in the moment.
Hmm.
And there are two approaches that I've authored, one of which is called the Thrive approach, and the other one is the human connection model. And the Thrive approach is all about time, defining time, understanding how time works differently for both the care provider and the care recipient.
Yeah.
Because the care recipient might not even know where they are in time or space, and it's terrifying. So, as a care provider, I have to learn how to tune in with my loved one and discover where in time, whether it's now or in the past or potentially in the future, thinking about what they feel like they need later, what they feel like those needs are, whether it's food or water or safety or security or self-affirmation. What are those needs, and how do I help them discover them, and how do I help provide them
Right.
as a loved one? So the Thrive approach focuses very much on connecting with that person in time, in space, knowing that as care provider and care recipient, we both define those completely different. One example I like to use is like if I'm trying to get my loved one to an appointment, that is my task focus in that time.
Right.
And so I'm like, come on, mom, we have to go. We have to be there by 12:30. And mama's like, where's where? When's 12:30? Is
Right.
this 12:30 in the morning, 12:30 at night? When's 12:30? I don't understand. And so as the care provider, I might be like, come on, mom, let's just get some clothes on. We gotta go. We gotta get in the car. And I'm in the moment in my task, trying to get to the goal.
Hmm.
And mom is still like, where are we going and why are you upset? Why are you angry at me? Because she feels your stress. She feels your frustration. She feels your anxiety because it's the gestures and the feelings that the person living with cognitive change picks up much quicker than the words that we're using. And so I need to learn to understand what her definition of time is
Right.
and what language she's using in the moment. Is she reading my gestures? Is she reading my anxiety? And if she is, she's going to get more scared. She's going to get more anxious, potentially maybe even angry, and it becomes a downward spiral.
Absolutely. That's very true. So, what do you recommend for a person that is practicing care? You know, maybe it's for a spouse, a child, a husband, a parent, whoever it may be. How do they learn how to tune into that and, be there, be present with them?
So if we were going to look at the Thrive slide that you're going to on the screen now, the Thrive slide or the Thrive approach refers to time, knowing, first of all, the T in Thrive is time, so not to rush, being patient,
Mhm.
and living in that moment with that person, however you can. Now, of course, I understand not everybody has access to the same resources, and sometimes we just have to be more rushed because I have multiple family members that I'm taking care of. We are in the sandwich generation now where a lot of my fellow generation X, people are caring for older adults and young children or teenagers at the same time. So I naturally just feel kind of sandwiched and squished between and more stressed and more anxious myself, which will keep me in my task orientation. So using some mindfulness techniques to just take a breath and be in the moment. Be like, okay, let me settle my mind so that I can provide comfort for my person who is living with cognitive change. Because if I'm not comfortable, it's going to come across. And that's the gesture, that's the emotion that they are going to read. And like I just said, they're going to feel angry, they're going to feel anxious, they're going to feel stressed, and it's going to be a downward spiral. And we don't want that. So I need to take time and I need to understand where in time they are and allow myself to be there the best that I can. I truly believe as care providers, we're always doing the best we can in the moment. That doesn't mean that we don't need tools, but I also have to understand how my toolbox may not be the same tools that my loved one can use.
Mhm.
So using my toolbox for me and trying to apply that to finding my loved ones' sharpest tools that they can tune into themselves and then building a bridge between. So also health is really important. One thing that I've often found is because of the stigma associated with cognitive impairment, we tend to put blinders on when it comes to all other areas of health, particularly pain management, because a person living with cognitive change, especially in the later stages of the disorder, they might not be able to communicate to their care provider that they're in pain
Right.
and they're experiencing pain but can't verbalize it or can't describe it. They might only be in a gesture format, which, as Teepa Snow talks about, the being the message detective. We have to kind of look at their overall presentation, like, oh, were they wincing when they move this way, or are they grabbing their shoulder in a way that I've never seen them touch their shoulder before? And so focusing on their overall health and trying to work with your primary care physician very intently to discover what health techniques or what health services are needed, including eye care, dental care. And those are two areas that are often really, really hard to provide services for as a person continues to progress through this disorder because a lot of them depend on a person's feedback. One example that I often had as a geriatric care manager is I would take a client to the eye doctor, and you know how the eye doctor is like showing you different lenses. I don't know lenses if you wear glasses, but put
I
different
don't.
lenses on
Yeah.
it. Perfect eye vision. That's a gift for you. So they put these little lenses in front of your eyes and say, well, which one looks better? is it lens A or lens B? Well, I can do that if I don't have cognitive impairment, but a person with cognitive impairment, huh? Look, oh yeah, they're all good. They look great. And I ran into this multiple times with people living with cognitive change because they would always say their eyesight was fine. It was great. And the doctor would look at their eyes and be like, there's no way that their eyesight is fine. And so understanding that a lot of these healthcare needs become more challenging as a person's disease progresses because they cannot participate in the feedback required for their own care. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't include them in the care. That doesn't mean that we make decisions around their preferences. That doesn't mean that we don't tell them what their diagnosis is and allow them to go through the process of grief associated with that diagnosis. That is really important for a person's overall emotional health, to understand what's happening to them, how come their memory is impaired, how come life seems like a heavier effort to get through day to day, how come I feel more emotionally dysregulated. It's really important to include a person in their diagnosis, in their treatment and service plan, and help them do the best they can with the tools they have at their disposal. The next part of the Thrive approach is relevance. So keeping it, if you're here, keeping it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it relevant. So I'm not going to be discussing the past. I'm not going to be bringing up what happened 15 years ago and being like, Mom, don't you remember that blah, 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 blah. You know, maybe she does, maybe she doesn't, but how is that truly helpful? Especially if she doesn't remember, then it's embarrassing. Like,
Right.
yeah, I don't remember that. And but Mom, we had breakfast this morning. Don't you remember you had French toast? No, I didn't. No, I didn't. And next thing you know, you have an argument. So that's not helpful either. So keeping it relevant, not quizzing the person, setting up the environment so that it is strength-based and successful for that individual. I would talk about reliability without restriction. Okay. So you want the environment to be reliable. You want the person to feel that they can trust their environment. You want the person to feel that the structure throughout the day is a structure that they can rely on. We're going to wake up at a certain time. We're going to have a breakfast at a certain time. We're going to go for a walk outside, in the morning. We're maybe going to do some exercise together, or listen to some music together, or do some arts and crafts together. Yeah, I can rely on that, and it helps me feel seen, and it helps me feel safe. So that having a relevant and a reliable environment is so essential to a person's well-being and being included. So that's what the I stands for, is inclusion, feeling like I'm part of my day, that I'm being seen, I'm being known, I'm being recognized, my opinion matters. I might not be able to have a practical decision-making capacity about many things in my life, but that doesn't mean that people don't ask. It doesn't mean that people are not going to listen to what my opinion is. I think all of us have the right to share our perceptions and our opinions. And then also, as a care provider, there is going to be times where I'm going to get that feedback and be able to act on it. And then there's going to be other times where I'm going to get that feedback and potentially have to make a different decision.
Right.
And there are crucial times about that. I experienced that with my own father when he didn't want to have any caregivers in the home. He's like, no, I'm fine. I don't need help. I don't need caregivers. So essentially I became, the caregiver. I used a lot of technology because, as I mentioned before, I was living out of state. So much of what I was needing to do was use cameras and use personal alarms and call him on video phone every day and just kind of check in and make sure he was okay. And then there came a time when he wasn't okay. And I had to make that crucial decision that when he went to a hospital, and he was actually in the hospital for about a month, where he was not going back home. And the doctor called me. He had a wonderful relationship with his primary care physician. And the primary care physician said to me boldly on the phone, "You do know he's no longer safe at home." And I said, "I know that." And we've had that conversation. And I think he's ready. He might not like it, but I think he's ready. And as the care provider, that's scary, because also I might have been telling myself I have to be all to all the time. And that's not true, and that's not helpful. I often train care providers to have that insight, to understand that if I can't be my own surgeon and I can't be my own dentist, I might not be able to be my own memory care specialist as well
Right.
for my loved one. And understanding that there are sometimes times where, being a daughter is perfect, and not being the person that has to, put a person in the shower, or feel that every task is going to be a frustrating one. Sometimes it's great just to have help, so
Right.
that I can sit back and say, I'm going to be the daughter, and I'm going to continue to value our relationship as father and daughter, and love that relationship, and love how it thrives. I'm going to see you as my dad, and I'm going to treasure every moment that we have left together. And that's where my peace of mind, through my maybe ambiguous loss, gets fulfilled, because then I'm using my support system to not just help my loved one, but help myself.
Yeah.
Um, that includes me also in the care. The last two parts of the Thrive model is inclusion. Oh, as we talk about inclusion, validation and empathy. So validating the person and knowing that you're there to listen to them, that you see them, that you care about them, that you want to comfort them, that you're there to help them be seen and heard in the moment. That is so essential to helping a person feel peaceful, and feel trusting, and feel okay. And similar with empathy. If I can, I can't have the disease, right? And we are in very two different states of mind. But what I can do is I can build a bridge between my state of mind and your state of mind the best that I can. And we talked about resources earlier, where sometimes I find that care providers are pretty much literally trying to find the wood to build the bridge that they and their loved one are standing on. And that is so challenging, because it's like they're scrambling, and they get into a sense of stress and strain and frustration. And the person living with cognitive change feels that stress and strain and frustration. So that's why that preparation, and that empathy, and that inclusion, and that validation, and the focusing on time and health is so essential, because then we're both thriving, and we're both prepared, and we're both able to move forward in a better relationship.
That's wonderful. Um, what about communication techniques that can help? Because people, when you say communication, they often think that means just verbal, but there's a lot of other cues you can use as insights to a person's, pain or discomfort or their mood or something else that might be going on with them. It's not always just verbal for communication, but what techniques for communication could you offer?
So communication, like you just said, is so much more than words. And we know this even without bringing in cognitive impairment. We can have, full conversations and arguments without even using words. Gestures is actually the number one way that more people communicate and feel seen and understood. Both nonverbal communication, and how we emotionally reflect is really the key to communication, interpersonally.
Yeah.
And so knowing that with a person living with cognitive impairment, and then also knowing that as the cognitive impairment progresses, the words will often become less and less, less and less.
Mhm.
In some disorders, a person loses, that ability to speak earlier on, through different types of diagnoses. And so I have to kind of become that message detective, where often I found myself saying to people living with cognitive impairment, take a breath. Okay, I'm not here to worry about the words that you're using. I'm here to help you get what you feel like you need now. Just take a breath and let the words come. I'm here. I'm not rushing. It's okay. It's okay. You're okay. I'm okay. Take your time.
Yeah.
And being able to say that, to say, take your time, that comes from a very specific mindset where I know I have time. And the resources of feeling that you have time comes from that preparation and that ability to be mindful of where I am in time and space and where my loved one is in time and space, and building that bridge together. So I need to be aware of how stress affects my tone of voice, how stress affects my gestures. As a person living with cognitive impairment continues to experience more severe changes, their ability to process their environment lessens, and the part of the brain that is more utilized is the amygdala. Now, for those of you familiar a little bit with some brain biology, the amygdala is your emotional center. It is actually your fight or flight or freeze center of your brain. And so the executive functioning area of the brain is what experiences the most loss with certain forms of cognitive impairment. And as that executive functioning lessens and lessens, it's the amygdala that winds up processing the stimulation around you. And so if my only three answers are fight, flight, or freeze, that anxiety and that stress is going to be much more heightened. So as a care provider, I need to find the best way to communicate with this person where they're not going to see me as a threat, where
Right.
they're not going to see me as somebody that is there to harm them, or tell them what to do when they don't want to do it, or force them to do something that they don't want to do, or scare them, or make them feel vulnerable, or make them feel stressed, or make them feel unheard or unseen or uncared for. So that's where, again, my toolbox comes in, and noticing how my stress-filled message is going to lead to stress in that person. Reducing background noise, so essential. Quiet. This is where my ADHD self is just like, yes, I love quiet. I love quiet, but not everybody is comfortable with quiet.
Right.
you know when I worked in communities for many years, sometimes I would have people say to me, I don't dear. And I'd be like, you know what, maybe for you. But it's okay. Some people love the sense of just a peaceful, quiet, calming environment instead of the TV on, the radio on, announcements overhead, people talking all the time. For my brain that is disordered, I'm going to have a really hard time focusing on what you're saying to me or what you want me to do with all that external stimuli. It might even seem scary to me. When I would train professional caregivers, I would, kind of talk about times when they might be interacting with each other and right in front of the person living with cognitive change, and how that person feels that you're talking to them. And if you're laughing, they feel like you're maybe laughing at them.
Right.
And how, yeah, that might not be intended. Surely that might not be intended, but that's the message that's being received.
Hmm.
So understanding, how all of my, communication is being seen potentially as threatening or fearful or stress inducing or anxiety inducing, and how can I change that through my communication? Again, don't quiz the person. That's just not helpful. Don't correct the person. Uh, Telling the person over and over that they have cognitive impairment is really just, it's not, first of all, it's not kind. And
Right.
second of all, it's not helpful. Oh, mom, you don't remember because you have dementia. Come on, mom, it's okay. I understand that you don't know because you have dementia. I have dementia. Oh my God, why would you tell me I have dementia? Why would you tell me that? Come on, mom, you were at the doctor with me 2 years ago. You remember. No, she doesn't.
Right.
She, does,
Yeah.
she doesn't remember. And so saying that to her is really only harmful. I've also found that eye contact is really important, as long as it's not creepy. We don't want to be like staring a person down. So we want to have that comfortable eye contact, similar with touch. We want to make sure that touch is welcome and that touch is not traumatizing, it's not triggering, it's not misunderstood. So you first want to focus on eye contact, then you want to focus on potentially a verbal connection, and then you maybe want to move to gestures, and knowing that person and what they're most comfortable with through your communication is the key. A few years ago, I heard a journalist being interviewed, and her number one skill about interviewing other people was that if my mouth is moving, I'm not listening. And I think that is also really important for a person working with persons with cognitive change is if I'm talking at you, I'm not listening to you. I'm not connecting with you. I'm in my world and I'm only focusing on my world. So if my job is to do the best I can to understand your world and tune into your world and connect to your world, I need to be quiet.
Mm,
I need to listen. I
right.
need to open up my point of view to kind of enter into your world.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, too, I just got a couple more questions here. What what do you explain to families? Because we encounter quite a few families ourselves, and one of the issues when there's a loved one diagnosed with a cognitive issue, I'm going to say dementia, and we've all, you and I especially, have heard the phrase, sundowning or sundown symptoms. Tell us how sundown symptoms can affect a person, because I think that's really crucial for people to understand when, mom or dad or whoever the loved one may be, they might have their baseline throughout the day, but then all of a sudden it's starting to get dark out and it's getting much later in the day. And then they're like, where did my mom go? Where did my dad go? Or whoever it may be. And they're going through that sundowning. Explain what those symptoms are and, how it may affect their loved one.
So sundown symptoms are all about that amygdala waking up more and more in the brain and processing the environment through anxiety and stress.
Mm.
So as the day go, and there's a lot of different theories, honestly. I've heard theories about neurochemistry, about how it's related to the quality of sleep, how it's about the stressful environment the person is experiencing throughout the day, and they just get to the point of pure exhaustion where it's like, my brain has to process so much stimuli, I'm efforting in every moment just to function. And I had a client say that to me many years ago. My daughter doesn't understand how much effort I'm making every moment just to be here, just to do the day to day. I can't remember how to make a cup of tea anymore, and that scares me because I've been a tea drinker my entire life, and sitting down and struggling with the kettle is frustrating and scary. And so I have to put so much more effort into every activity just to stay independent, and that's terrifying. And so there are those theories about there's just so much stress that a person can't handle, throughout the day before they lose it. They break down. Now there's also the theory about being lost in time and space. And I had that with my own father where he would fall asleep on the recliner And because again, I had cameras all over the house. It was a Big Brother house. So I could always tune in and see kind of where he was. And I would sometimes occasionally find him on the porch at
Yeah.
3 o'clock in the morning. And I'd be like, oh my God, what do I do from Maryland? He's in New Jersey. He's on the porch at 3 o'clock in the morning. And, he always had his cell phone, thank goodness. And although he was hearing impaired, he usually heard the cell phone ring. So I would, call him and I'd be, Dad, why are you outside? I'm waiting to go to the doctor. They're picking me up. And I'm like, no, no, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Are you sure? Are you sure? So I'm like, yep. You just got to go back in the house. And
Yeah.
you're like, okay. And so understanding that that person could be just lost in time and space. And if you don't know why they're lost in time and space, and for my dad, it was because he fell asleep on the recliner and he woke up and he didn't realize it was dark. He didn't realize what time of day it was, and he just focused on his appointment because he knew his appointment was coming up. But what I could do as a loved one is be like, it's okay. I understand it's dark out. You think it might be early morning, but it's actually nighttime. And
Right.
if I'm living with the person, which of course is the best situation, let's go back inside. Let's go back inside. But no, I have to wait for the doctor. It's okay. The doctor will be here and I will help you when the doctor arrives. And for now, we're going to go back inside. And sometimes when I would work with people who were experiencing different sundown symptoms, allowing them to do what they wanted to do in a safe way, such as, I need to leave now. Okay, I understand. Let's go together.
Right.
Let's go together. You want to go for a walk? Let's go for a walk. Get my jacket on. Let's get your jacket, and we're going to go for a walk. And knowing that the environment is safe, that they can go for that walk, and they're there with me, that they're not alone, is the key. So then they feel like they've went out that front door and they went for their walk, and maybe 5 minutes later, it doesn't even have to be a long period of time. It's like, okay, it's nice out here, but I'm starting to get cold. Is it okay if we go back inside? Oh yeah, sure, yeah, it's okay. Because a lot of times with people who are in the more severe stages of cognitive impairment, because they are lost in time and space, they can't connect to 5 minutes outside versus 15 minutes outside. So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm feeling a little cold too. I'm ready. But just feeling that they had that freedom to make that decision and walk out that front door safely and effectively without feeling imprisoned is so essential to their well-being.
Right.
So kind of having them follow your lead, that you're accepting of their emotion is really key. I can see that you're anxious. What can I do? I can see that you're feeling stressed. How can I help? I'm here to listen. Let's talk.
It's such great information, Pam, and, your years of experience and just, kind of being the boots on the ground, in senior care and, helping to support these families is definitely in need of lauding. And I applaud everything you've done. I want to just ask you real briefly in closing, because we're kind of up against it here. For all the caregivers that are undoubtedly listening or watching this, how can they best apply these approaches? Because it's easy for you and I to sit here, and give advice and give recommendations. But it's another thing when you're, kind of in the throes of it and trying to get mom to, take a shower or a bed bath or, get dad to, eat dinner or, whatever the, innumerable obstacles that family caregivers face day in and day out. How can they best apply these approaches?
I think the bottom line really comes to understanding how kindness goes a long way.
Yeah.
Normalizing the experience of your connection together and being less and less task oriented in my world, so I can live that person's truth is that's essential. If I can get out of my must do mind, where I'm like, we must have dinner at 6 p.m. Yep. Must you? Maybe not. Maybe you don't have to. Let's try to come up with a plan that if you have dinner at 7 p.m. or 3 p.m. or 9 p.m., what's the worst that can happen, right? Maybe it would be better if I looked outside of my comfort zone and reached into that person's comfort zone and helped them to be as comfortable as they can be, even if it's eating at 9 p.m., because maybe they're going to eat more at 9 p.m. instead of resisting you and fighting you and saying, no, I don't want to eat that, leave me alone, go away, 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we can, how about we set up a grazing? Sometimes grazing is a way of helping person with eating challenges where I'm just eating little bits and snacks throughout the day instead of breakfast, lunch, dinner. Grazing is again opening up that broad brush approach and saying it doesn't have to be breakfast, lunch, dinner. It could be a giant buffet all day long, and then I know that person is getting what they need nutritionally, in a way that they can accept it. Because every time I'm stuck in my task, I'm opening up to resistance, and resistance leads to loss of success or you don't get what you're looking for if you're trying to force it. So focusing on opening your mind, being in the moment, helping the person feel safe and comfortable, and just being there with them however it shows up, in kindness and support and validation and empathy. If you can do that, you got it.
Right. Absolutely. What before we close, if people want to learn more about you or reach out, where would you like them to go?
I often tell people you can find me on Facebook. That's my number one social media site, but I also work for Corewood Care. And so Corewood Care is a company that does care management services and home care services in the state of Maryland, particularly Montgomery County, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. And as the Associate Director of Care Management, I speak to every client in care management to help them find the resources they need with our team of care managers. So that's the best way to find me. And I think you have my email and my different ways of
What's the website, Pam, for Corewood?
So Corewood is www.corewoodcare.com.
Corewood
And
Care.
that's our website. Yeah, corewoodcare.com. And my direct email is Pamela, Pamela, at corewoodcare.com. And working with a geriatric care manager is a wonderful tool, but I know it's not always a resource that everyone has access to. So finding what resources you have access to in your area is often essential, whether it's respite or through the services of a geriatric care manager, an aging life care specialist, or just building that support system on your own with people you can trust around you. However you can do it, you got this. And I completely support our family members who are going through this challenging time, while also understanding the care partnership and including the person living with the disorder is how we find our ways to better relationships together.
Wonderful. Well, Pamela Mills, thank you so much for joining us here, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
All right. Thank you so much, Lance. I'm really excited to be on your show, and best to you and your continued work.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Pamela Mills for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you here next time at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.